Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. What a week. It's crazy to think that even with one of the main promotions, the UFC, not having any fights, we still got all of this MMA news. It's amazing to have it all come in and digest it because of how much it means for the rest of the year. Now, listen, if you were to tell me that 2020 would have started and ended like the way it did, I would have called you crazy. The UFC especially did an amazing job in putting on great shows and honestly making me feel like they didn't skip a beat. We got all of these amazing fights that happened. And now with 2021 coming up and seeing some of the amazing big names that are popping up that we know are going to fight, like Conor McGregor, like Israel Adesanya, and even Amanda Nunes popping up. Knowing that all of these fighters are going to fight in 2021, man, is it going to be a good year. Not just for the UFC, because I do believe that other organizations like Bellator and ONE FC, and to see what PFL does with some of their new fighters, just thinking about that makes me so excited for 2021. And it makes me so excited that I actually brought in a guest host to help me with this podcast. Because of all the topics that came in, I had my friend Nibs here who went and found some of the most interesting topics that we can discuss. So Nibs, if you want to introduce yourself to everybody.
Hey guys, thank you for having me on, Naz. So I'm pretty interested in the UFC scene myself, so very happy to be on the podcast.
No worries. And I know for a fact that you have the knowledge and you actually found some of the interesting topics that we can talk about. And so why don't you tell us the first topic?
All right, so first up, recently the UFC Twitter account actually leaked that Conor versus Dustin is actually going to be for the belt. So what do you think about that, Nas?
It's crazy because in one of my previous podcasts, I talked about how Khabib Nurmagomedov, if he's eventually going to give up this belt. The way that this occurred was, I think it was like a bot or something, was replying to someone on Twitter. And what this bot actually said was, are you excited for Conor versus Dustin for the belt? That might be a mistake, but let's say it's not. Let's say it is actually what's going to happen. Man, that changes the whole picture for the 155-pound division. We're talking about a reorg that's going to shake all of MMA, to be honest with you. Because whoever wins, be it Dustin or Conor, I think there's two different situations that happen. Now, let's say this Twitter thing is for real. Let's say Conor McGregor beats Dustin Poirier. Then we have a whole list of people that he can fight. We got Justin Gaethje. We got Michael Chandler and Dan Hooker also fighting on the same card as him, who could contend for that belt. But let's say it's Dustin Poirier. I think, and this is where Conor McGregor's strategic mind comes in, is that the fact is, if Conor loses, I think that calls for an immediate rematch. That's what Conor's going to ask for, but we might not get that. We might actually get Conor and Dustin fight later on. Who knows what happens? But I think that they need to fight again. Because like we all know, these guys already fought once. And Conor beat him in the first round. Like, definitely. Dustin put up a great fight at the beginning, but it was a very clean knockout to the top of the head where Dustin dropped, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So that leads me to believe that if this is for the belt, those are the two kind of narratives that I see. I either see Dustin winning and having to fight McGregor again, and then we see what happens. Or we see that Conor wins and he fights the rest of the roster, or the rest of the people underneath him, like I mentioned before. Now, here's the thing. Either way, if this is for the belt, I think that Conor McGregor is still going to have his season. Now, be it he wanted his season to be in 2020, but he'll just have it in 2021. It gives him a nice little, what would you say, like a ramp, a jumping off point. But Dana White did have a live chat with Laura Sanko for the ESPN Plus members. And in that chat, Dana White mentioned that the fight would be for the number one contender spot. It might be in that interview or somewhere, but Dana White did say at one point that it might be for the number one contender spot. Because he's having the meeting with Khabib Nurmagomedov. And he says that he'll be able to convince Khabib to come back and fight. Now, if Khabib's coming back, then that throws a monkey wrench into what we just talked about, obviously. Khabib retains the belt, and he fights the winner of Dustin and Conor. And I don't see any way that this could get mixed up, because that's for the number one contender spot. Dustin already beat Gaethje, and Gaethje just lost. And if Dustin can beat Conor McGregor, then that's a really good way to get back into title contention. And if Conor wins, then we all know the narrative there. I think that Conor McGregor will fight for the belt again if he's the number one contender. But like Nibs was saying, this could be for the belt itself, which is really exciting for both fighters and is an amazing opportunity. I mean, Dustin Poirier, I was listening to an interview, and he said he wanted to etch his name into the history books. Right now, in his opinion, he's knocking on the door, but he wants to have a page in the book. I mean, I think he already has a page in that book, but this is just to cement it there. Let's move on. Nibs, what's the next topic?
Okay, so Dana White actually said that Francis versus Stipe might be in April. So give us your thoughts on that, Naz.
Yeah, man. What a crazy fight. We already saw it once when Stipe neutralized the boogeyman, Francis Ngannou. Francis, as we all know, was the scariest guy in the division. He still is. But when Stipe neutralized him in their first fight, it was like, wow, we really had to pump the brakes in that moment. But the run that Francis Ngannou has gone on has brought back that confidence. I think in a couple of his fights right after, and I'm speaking about Francis, in a couple of those fights, we lost that kind of luster, not just luster, the fear that people had when fighting Francis Ngannou. I'm not saying that anybody goes into that cage scared of any other fighter. These are trained killers, which I've talked about numerous times. But I think that he gained something by fighting the fights that he's had. Quick wins, knocking people out in the first round. I mean, we see this scary guy coming back to fight. Now, here's the thing. I guess a lot of people, and this is just my assumption, by talking to people and chit-chatting, that they would assume that this fight is going to be similar to the last. It could be. Stipe is a well-calculated fighter. He's going to go out there and he's going to, I think he has some of the best game planning in MMA that we've seen. Him and his coaches, man, they go in there with a game plan. Stipe executes it flawlessly. But when you got a guy like Francis Ngannou who comes in and throws those bombs, it can totally throw that monkey wrench that we just talked about into everybody's plans. That guy can knock you out in any way. We've seen him knock out people with shovel uppercuts. We've seen him knock out people against the cage, like real close quarters. I mean, we've seen this guy do some amazing stuff in the UFC. And it's going to be a really interesting fight because no matter what, let's say he gets beat a bunch of times, Francis Ngannou is still going to be the really scary guy who everybody is worried about because he's always going to have that knockout power. So let's talk about the next topic. What do we have, Nabs?
All right, so next up, we see that Ryan versus Davis might actually happen. So we've seen that both of these fighters are actually very interested in fighting each other. So what do you think about that, Nats?
I mean, the thing is that we saw Ryan in a fight where he got put to the ground. He got knocked out. Let's just say it. It was really scary, actually, because his arm actually folded behind his back and he dropped to the ground. But he got back up. That was the one thing that we were looking for in García. The fact is that we didn't know if he was a real fighter or not. We didn't know if when the chips are all down, if he would still get up. And he did. And credit to him for getting that amazing body punch. I mean, he smacked him and he got that liver shot and he dropped to the ground. With those liver shots, just like this show's name, the body punch, it's one of those things that it takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of time to take effect. And right when it did, you could see his opponent dropped to the ground. And he did not want to get up. There was no chance that he was getting up in that moment. But let's rewind. Let's say if Tank Davis hit him with that same shot, would he get up? We're talking about a guy that, man, even in his last fight, Tank Davis got that crazy uppercut, which if you remember that fight, when I watched it, he was doing that uppercut throughout the whole fight. Throughout the whole fight, you could watch Tank throwing it. And a lot of coaches would have said, hey, man, you got to stop throwing that. Like, it's not working. And he ended up doing it while he's got his opponent backed up into a corner and hits him with that crazy uppercut, dropping him. You're telling me that this won't be a crazy fight? This is going to be a crazy nuts fight if it happens. Now, we've all seen the clip where both of them are chirping at each other and going at it and saying that they want to fight each other next. But will it happen? I don't think so. This is the problem with boxing. Both of these guys are ready and willing to fight. But will it happen? I don't think so. Because there's too much to lose. And let's just say these guys just don't have, they need to build it up a little bit more. According to boxing. If this was MMA, I mean, if this was the UFC, this fight would have already been booked. Look at Adesanya, for example. This guy beat Paulo Costa, and then right away he called out for the 205 belt. And now he's fighting Blachowicz. It just happens at a faster pace in MMA and even faster in the UFC. So do I think this fight is going to happen? I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I don't think it's a fight that we should be waiting for in 2021. Will it ever happen? I mean, it's tough to say this when you got Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury all circling around each other and saying that they might fight. Now, I know the record shows that contracts are out for certain fights and blah, blah, blah. But does that mean anything when these guys don't actually get into the ring with each other? That's the thing about boxing. Yes, these guys are going to talk. And credit to them, they're talking a lot more than any other boxer. They genuinely want to fight each other. Now, it comes to the promoters and the promotions to get it done. And to not, care about a loss as much. The thing about MMA, the reason why these fights happen is, yes, there are losses. People lose. It happens. It's part of the sport. You're not happy about it. No one should be happy about it. But the thing is that in MMA, we don't deem that as a black eye. We don't throw you aside after you've lost. You get another chance. I mean, if you're not made for the sport anymore, if you're not ready, if you come into that octagon and you don't look like you belong, we'll call you out. But with boxing, when we watch a boxer and he's whatever and has 0 losses, that's when he has the greatness. That's when we really want him to do well. But once he gets that one loss, it's a weird thing that happens in boxing. We just automatically go like, this guy's done. So I think that stigma needs to be out of boxing. Before we can see fights like this happen at a faster pace, like in the UFC and in MMA general. All right, Nibs, what's next?
All right, so next up is Usman versus Burns. So this fight was actually scheduled to happen before, but it got canceled after Burns got COVID. So it's pretty exciting that now it's basically confirmed that for UFC 258, we should be actually able to see this fight. So what do you think about this, Naz?
Man, this is a fight that we've all been waiting for. And like you said, it was unfortunate that Gilbert Burns got COVID at the time that he did. Now, why do I say that? This guy was on a run, man. He was fighting some amazing fights and devastating striking, amazing grappling. It's amazing to say this, and I think I'm reiterating this, but the fact is that a guy that comes from the grappling jiu-jitsu background that he has, to show the striking ability that he has is incredible. Now, why do I bring up the jiu-jitsu again? I think that this fight is going to be an amazing test for both of them in every single aspect of MMA. Both of them we know can strike, but they have different styles. Gilbert Burns likes to be on the outside, likes to have the traditional spacing between his opponent. But Kamaru Usman likes to get you against the cage, just like his fight with Jorge Masvidal. Got him against the cage, did those foot stomps, which look like they hurt a lot, which people are forgetting, but got him against the cage, hit him with those uppercuts right to the body, and really got into close quarters, which he does with all of his opponents. He did it with Tyron Woodley as well, which was amazing to see at the time because it was so devastating, because Tyron Woodley was Tyron Woodley at the time. He was the man. Kamaru Usman went in there and was the boogeyman, was the Nigerian nightmare, just like his nickname. I think that's why we're so excited for this fight. And people should be really pumped up for this. I think a lot of hype got lost after the fight didn't happen. The fact is that a lot of people wanted to see Masvidal in there. Masvidal rescued the show. He came in there and did all that amazing stuff where he got on a jet and flew, private jet, and flew all the way to Abu Dhabi to Fight Island, and was eating pizza on the way in Rome, and then went in there and saved the card. Now, that's who everybody wanted to see him fight originally because of just the hype, and he had the BMF title. But we all forgot the fact is that Gilbert Burns, first of all, he deserves the title fight. I know that's a ill-fated word, deserve. But the fact is that he had the title shot. He didn't get it, but now that he has it, it gets me even more hyped up because we saw Kamaru Usman fight Masvidal. Now, be it these guys, Masvidal fought him on a whatever week notice and just right away took the fight. We didn't see him at his full, his full kind of a training camp or anything like that. But the fact is, we still saw the fight. Now, I'd love to see that fight happen again, just to see what Jorge Masvidal will be like with the full camp. But this Gilbert Burns fight is interesting because, like I said, we're going to see all aspects of MMA utilized by two people who have come from different backgrounds and have learned the sport. A lot of people rag on Kamaru Usman's striking, but he utilizes it in a different way. Same thing with Gilbert Burns. And if it goes to the ground, man, that's a whole nother dimension that we might see with Kamaru Usman's wrestling, his amazing wrestling. But even if he takes him down, the bottom game of Gilbert Burns is going to be so advanced. And if Gilbert gets Kamaru down, First of all, that would be like a feat on its own, but that will show us Gilbert Burns' top game, which would be crazy as well. That was a good topic, Nibs. What's the next one?
All right, so next up, we see that Dana White, recently he made a post promoting the fight Conor against Dustin, and in the comments, one sarcastic commenter actually said that he was gonna pirate the fight and really enjoy it, and we actually saw Dana White reply to that comment that he has a surprise for everyone who pirates the UFC fights. So what do you think are the tactics that the UFC is going to use this year, Nas?
That's a really good topic. And I think it's one that we don't cover on the Body Punch that often. But the economics that go into, not allowing people to pirate and stuff like that is a really big deal. And I mean, I think COVID is going to put a damper on a lot of those illegal streams and bars and restaurants and all that kind of stuff. Because the fact is no one can go there and majority of the world. But the thing is that, are you really going to stop illegal streaming? That's the question. Because the fact is that a lot of people do it. A lot of people just do it, and it might be a way to really get your sport out there, because at the end of the day, especially in North America, pay-per-views can be really expensive. Now, I'm not saying to go illegally stream fights. Not saying that. But I'm saying maybe the UFC is just okay with allowing a couple people to illegally stream. Now, I know it's not a couple, it's a lot of people, but it gets your product out there. It gets your product out there, and it allows a lot of the people that aren't going to watch your stuff to still watch it. Right? Like, it sucks that we have no fans at the moment, but and one of the majority ways that a lot of fighters and promotions are going to make money is by illegally streaming it. So that's my kind of take on that. I think just all of the people, to allow this sport to grow to the levels that it's at right now, it has to be consumable by the whole world. I would say MMA is up there with all of the sports. It's crazy because even other athletes talk about MMA fighters and say that they're their heroes and they're the ones that they look to. So that kind of shows you how much this sport has exploded. And I don't think this sport would have exploded as much as it did without the illegal streams. That's just my thoughts. And now I don't have any numbers or anything in front of me, but that's just what I'm thinking. To allow everybody to watch, you got to allow it a little bit. Mind you, I'm going to reiterate this. I'm not saying go ahead and illegally stream all the sports, boxing or MMA. But I'm saying maybe the UFC and Dana White is going to allow some people, and he might be focusing on those restaurants and bars and all that kind of stuff who have been closed due to COVID. Now, what do I think the plan is that the UFC could implement to stop this? Man, I mean, we've heard stories in those bars and restaurants that like spies have been in there and like people from the UFC. I don't know how much I believe that. I mean, I don't know. We've heard it from some pretty credible sources, but I just can't see how they could stop it for everybody. It's something, and the thing is that even like 2020 was spearheaded by Dana White. Like Dana White said, okay, you know what, COVID, I'm still going to have my fights. So if there's one person who is going to try and stop illegal streaming, I would say that it's Dana White. But mind you, a lot of people have tried to stop this for years. Look at boxing, for example. They've tried to stop this for years and couldn't. But if there was anybody that could do it, I think it would be Dana White in the UFC. Good topic. What's next?
All right, so let's talk about one of the upcoming UFC events, UFC 259 on March 6th. So one of the big fights is Blachowicz versus Adesanya. So let me hear your thoughts about that fight.
Man, what a stacked card that is. Who else is on that card?
We also have Nunes versus Anderson on the fight. And we also have Jan versus Sterling.
Man, like I said, stacked card. And it's going to have a lot of eyeballs on it. Adesanya is turning into a mega star. Mind you, he might be already a mega star right now. And to have the opportunity to fight for the 205 belt is just crazy. And then he's talking about going to fight at heavyweight after this. Or I think he's saying he's going to defend both of them, but at one point he's going to go to heavyweight. This guy's doing some comic book stuff. He's doing some crazy stuff, and he's saying it and he's doing it with precision, and he's coming in there and making it look easy. This guy is doing some comic book stuff. Adesanya is just going after it. And to be on a card that is looking this great is just amazing. Now, Nunes versus Anderson is on this card. It's great to see the 145-pound weight division for the women be explored and actually have some definition, to have some real fights. Megan Anderson is made for that weight class. And Amanda Nunes, we all know, is going to come in as the mega favorite. It's just going to happen like that. When you're as dominant as Amanda Nunes is, and taking out Chris Cyborg and taking out all of her opponents in the devastating fashion that she's done, she's going to come in as the mega, star. And I know a lot of people are just going to write off Megan Anderson right at the beginning, but you can't do that. You can't just write her off. This is a weight class that she's been at for a while. She's been fighting here. And she's used to this weight class. She might show us something different because she's used to the weight. She's used to being there. But I'm never going to go against Amanda Nunes. But, and then I go back and forth. The fact is that we all got to watch every single one of these fights because we don't know what's going to happen. I can sit here and just tell you Amanda Nunes is going to do exactly what she does. But I could also go in favor of Megan Anderson and say maybe being at the weight class and having that weight on, she's used to it and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to say it's a pick'em because Amanda Nunes is always going to be the favorite and is always going to be the person that everybody's going to thinks is going to win. But I still think that this would be a great contest. And it'll just bring some life to that 145-pound division. I think that the more fights that you have, the more enticing it will become for other women to join this weight class. And lastly, but not least, on this card, we have Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. Now, this is a fight that was in the making for a little while now. I felt like it was supposed to be announced a long time ago. People were like, where is this fight? When is it going to be? And now we got it. We got this fight, and I'm so ready for it. Aljamain Sterling putting on the show that he did, taking out the Sandman, and then Petr Yan going against Jose Aldo and putting on a masterclass. I did a breakdown of that fight, and I mean, just by watching Petr Yan and seeing the way he moves and his striking, how crisp it is, going to Thailand and really focusing on his striking, and then you just see his wrestling. It's he's special. You know he's special for that 135-pound shark tank that they're in, both of them. Aljamain Sterling, I mean, at the beginning of his career, we were really excited about him. But now it seems like he's found another gear in his fighting career. He's found what he's great at, and he's just going at it. And this is a well-deserved title shot for him. This card itself, I mean, there's other fights on this card that's going to be fun to watch. I mean, there's a bunch, but these 3 fights are going to make this card something super special. And it's making this year, like I said, making this year have an amazing cap and show off all these great fighters. I mean, we have Conor fighting in a couple of weeks, and then we have this card, and then we have a couple other fights that were announced. 2021 is looking like an amazing year for MMA. What's next, Nibs?
All right, so next up we have Adesanya versus Jones, which could possibly happen in 2021. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great call. I mean, we just talked about Blachowicz and Adesanya fighting. The fact is that Adesanya went up in weight right when John Jones said that he's going to heavyweight. But the thing is, and this is what Luke Thomas said on his podcast, The Morning Combat, with Brian Campbell. But the fact is that he's not running away from John Jones. I mean, John Jones had his whole career to go to heavyweight, and now he's choosing to go. I don't think Adesanya's running away from him or ducking him. I think that this is a great opportunity for him. And he's one of those fighters, and I know you'll agree with me, Nibs, but he's one of those fighters that has the body frame to fight at all of these weight classes. We saw him in kickboxing fight at heavyweight. We saw him fight at all these different weight classes. And when we see his height and his reach, the frame that he has, we know that he can move in all of these weight classes. Now, with age, you start to stick to the higher weight classes. You get more used to it. I mean, look at Conor McGregor. He was able to make 145. He looked like he was on death's door, but Adesanya doesn't look like that. But at one point, I think he's going to stick to one of these higher weight classes. I'm going to say it again. And if you've listened to any of my other podcasts, you know that I think the time that when Brendan Schaub and Israel Adesanya stood next to each other, we all figured out, wow, this guy is really tall. He's standing next to a heavyweight contender at one point, and he's almost the same height or maybe a bit taller than Brendan Schaub. that's when I think it clicked for everybody that this guy's not just talking smack to John Jones just to get more followers on Twitter. He's a legitimate threat to anybody in the heavyweight division and in the light heavyweight division. I still think that he needs some time to develop in all of those weight classes, because I love to look at this example. But when Luke Rockhold went to 205, he packed on a lot of muscle. He looked like he was built out of stone. But when it came to that time, when he fought against Blachowicz, actually, it didn't look like he was ready for all of that weight. It just didn't look like the same Luke Rockhold. Luke Rockhold being one of the most tricky strikers in the UFC. Just didn't look the same. He didn't have that fluidity. And Blachowicz put it on him. But I'll put the asterisk on it. Luke Rockhold had some underlying injuries. I think it was staph infection or something like that. But I still think that the weight had something to do with his performance that day. So that's why I think Adesanya has to look at all of these examples, take a look at them, and study them for the possible fight with John Jones. What's up next?
All right, so next question. I'm actually very interested to hear your thoughts on this one. So, Nick Diaz's manager was pretty certain that he was going to make his return in 2021. So I'm wondering, what do you think the effect will be on the UFC, and what fights do you think he has coming up?
Yeah, Nick Diaz is interesting because it's even up in the air if his brother Nate is going to fight in 2021. But we talked about it before. We all thought that Nick might fight in 2020. But we never got to see that. We only got hints / highlights of Nick working out. He was showing off, doing some pad work and stuff like that. Doesn't really give us a good understanding of where he's at, because it's not like he's fighting anybody. But it did show us that he was training and he was getting ready. Now, the kind of sad part about this is that a lot of his career got shut down by some minor drug cases. It's like marijuana issues. So that shut down a lot of his career. When the fact is if that same case was happening in 2021, he wouldn't have to face all of these issues. But the thing is that we also got to understand that during this time, Nick had a lot of businesses. He has a lot of stuff that he's doing on the side, and he was making money. He was making a good living. So the thing is, will he be ready to jump back in that cage? It's the same effect that Conor might have had in some of his past fights, where he might have been too content with all the money that he was making outside of the UFC. Is Nick Diaz ready to fight again? This guy was on such a stint in the UFC and in other organizations. He's been fighting for a long time. He's had a lot of fights. And for him to take this kind of break might be the best thing for him. But this back and forth of saying, I remember he had that interview with Ariel Helwani and then came out again, and his manager was saying in 2020 that he was going to fight, and now he's saying in 2021 that he's going to fight. You just got to make up your mind and just do it. Fighting is not one of those things where you can have one foot in and one foot out. You either got to train and go hard or just retire. This in and out kind of thing is kind of frustrating, but it's also you should kind of pick whatever you want to do, because he's not getting any younger. And the fights that he's going to have in the UFC, I think it's going to have to be someone that's, we got to see where he's at, right? Like, the UFC is not one of those places that you can get easy fights. But for Nick Diaz, with the name that he has, I think you got to figure out where he is. You got to give him a fight where we can determine what level he's at. So then we can find out who he fights next. But the other thing is, on the flip side, Nick Diaz is not going to fight no chump. He's not going to fight anybody with no name. He has to fight a name. But we need to figure out who. I mean, some of the older fighters, like Robbie might be a good example, maybe someone he could fight. But Robbie Lawler is still, he's, you know, he can bring it back every once in a while. It's got to be someone in his league, but still have this star power. All right, Nibs, I think that is the last of the questions. I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast. It's always fun when I bring someone else onto the show, because I'm always talking to myself. So having someone else on here is really enjoyable. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me on. It was actually very enjoyable. I was actually looking forward to getting all these questions answered. So thank you for having me on.
No worries, man. Anytime. So thank you for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know myself and Nibs really appreciate it, and it just means a lot. So if you could subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell notification. If you can give 5 stars on the different platforms, that'd be really appreciated. And this has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.